Good evening, boys and girls. Today we are going to be going over Module 4, and specifically we're going to be going over Essential Standard Number 2, Learning Target Number 1. We're going to start off by looking at this problem. Middle school students voted on a new school mascot. The results show that 4 out of every 10 voters selected the tiger as the new mascot. So if we were to write this 4 out of 10 as a fraction, we could write it 4 out of 10. This 4 out of 10 is known as a relationship. The type of relationship it is called a part-to-whole ratio. So since we know that it is a part-to-whole ratio, another way that we can write part-to-whole ratios is 4 colon 10. We could also write it as 4 to 10. And the way that we know that it's a part to whole is because 4 is the part of the voters that voted for tiger. Out of the 10 total voters. Something very important for us to understand is our vocab word, which is percent, and percent means per 100. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this fraction that we have, which is our starting rate of 4 over 10, and we're trying to get to a number over 100. If you remember back to Module 3, when we did rates and equivalent rates on a double number line, when we moved forward, we multiplied. If we moved backwards, we divided. So we know that 100 is greater than 10, which means that we're moving forwards. So we're going to be multiplying. 10 times what equals 100? 10. Very good. So whatever we do to one side, we must do to the other. So we're going to do 4 times 10. 4 times 10 equals 40. So here we have 40 over 100. And if percent means a number per 100, and 40 is our number per 100, then our percentage is 40%. Now let's look at how we could represent 40% using a picture. This image right here is what we call a hundredths decimal grid. Now the reason it's called a hundredths decimal grid is because there are 100 boxes, meaning that each of these boxes is 1%, representing the fraction 1 out of 100. If we were to shade this in to represent our 40%, we would shade in 40 total boxes. And excuse me, I know I'm not doing the best job here. Now I could go box by box and color one box in at a time, or I could use some reasoning. Now I know that because one box is 1%, 10 boxes is 10%. Therefore, each of these rows is 10%. And if I color in 4 of them, that would be 40%. Another way I could represent this is to use what's called a tenths decimal grid. Over here, I would color in 4 of these. Now, this is a tenths decimal grid, meaning that one of these bars is 10%. So if I shade in 4 of them, 4 times 10 would be 40%. Another way to represent our 40% is to use a tape diagram. Now remember, you can only use a tape diagram connected like this when you have a part to whole ratio. And because we do, we can use our tape diagram to represent our 40%. And the reason we color in 4 of these boxes is because out of the 10 boxes total, it's 100%, meaning that each one of these individual boxes is 10%, because 100 divided by 10 is 10%. So therefore, 10 times 4 would be 40%. Let's look at another way to represent fractions as percentages. Shaunis's cat had 2 kittens, an orange kitten and a gray kitten. The orange kitten weighs 1.5 times as much as the gray kitten. How much does the orange kitten weigh? Now let's say that the gray kitten weighs 4 ounces. If the gray kitten weighs 4 ounces, then the orange kitten weighs 1.5 times as much. So we know we're going to be timesing or multiplying. We would be doing 1.5 times 4. We could also write it like this if this is easier for you. 1.5 times 4. I know that 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6, and then I can't forget to bring my decimal straight down. So I have 6 ounces. Now let's look at why this makes sense using some pictures. Now let's say that this bar right here, this tape diagram, represents the gray kitten. 100% of the gray kitten's weight is 4 ounces. Now this whole bar representing 4 ounces, or 100%, is only the one of the 1.5. This bar right here is another 100%, but I only need 0.5 of it. So I color in 5 of the 10 boxes, meaning that I'm coloring in 50%. I'm coloring in half of it. So if a whole of the gray kitten's weight is 4 ounces, half of the 4 ounces is 2. So this much is 2 ounces. 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 ounces. And that's why mathematically 1.5 times 4 is 6. Now that I know the orange kitten's weight is 6 ounces, if I wanted to compare it to the gray kitten's weight of 4 ounces, I could write it like this. If I want to change it to where I have my 6 over 4 written as a percentage, I first have to get my number per 100, because percent means per 100. So I will have to multiply 4 times something equals 100. 4 times 25 equals 100. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I will do 6 times 25, which equals 150. Anytime you have your starting fraction, you can call it your beginning rate, your beginning fraction, or your beginning ratio. when you want to multiply or divide a fraction, that's called scaling. Now, this is only true if you multiply the numerator, which is the top number, and the bottom number, which is the denominator. If you multiply them both by the same number or divide them both by the same number, that's called scaling. If you want to go up, like we've done here, you multiply. If you want to go down, you divide. Another way to say scaling down is to say simplify. So if you divide a fraction to get the smallest amount of numbers possible, then you are simplifying that fraction. Any answer that you get when you scale up or down is what is known as an equivalent ratio, equivalent rate, or equivalent fraction. So to summarize, you have a starting rate, ratio, or fraction. You scale or multiply to get your equivalent rate. A percent means a number represented per 100. So 40 over 100 would be 40% or 0.40. The way to know how to represent it as a decimal is to ignore the percent sign, and then you do 1, 2, and then put your decimal. Same thing down here. Your starting rate, you scale it up, you get 150 over 100, and because percent means a number per 100, here you have 150%. To represent that as a decimal, you ignore the percent sign, then you say 1, 2, decimal, which will give you 1.5. You can just ignore this 0. Same thing up here. You can ignore these zeros. They don't matter. The number is the same. That is all for Essential Standard number 2, Learning Target 1. Thank you.